What's going on? How's it going, everybody? Hopefully, the sound is good enough. Let me get my face up into the camera. So, today, Andrew Yang released his climate action plan, um, which I've been really excited about and kind of like pensive, just uh, just because Bernie came out in support of the Green New Deal, and a lot of people have been sort of lauding it as if it's like this enormous plan that's going to give us all these incredible benefits. And all due respect to the Green New Deal, there's a lot missing from the Green New Deal, and there's a lot of stuff that's tearing people kind of apart. Not even inside of just like the left and the right circles. It's kind of internal even on the left, and I don't think that just a sheer appropriation of the Green New Deal was the right choice for Bernie. And honestly, he doesn't have my support unless he walks this back. So, yeah, I've just been waiting for Andrew Yang to release his own climate plan, and it's out. So I want to go over it. I want to just read over it, and if anybody wants to talk about it, we can talk about it. So, yeah, I guess let's just get started. I'm just gonna scan a little bit, see what we're in for, and give people a little more time to head on in. Oof. I only say oof because I know I'm in for a read. Oh, good look, citations. Look at all these citations. Isn't that nice? References, resources. We got links on Bernie's site. Got citations for the Green New Deal, but it's not. There's so many claims in the Green New Deal that have already been refuted. I've, like, on the ground, I realized, like, organically, I realized problems with the Green New Deal because I argue about these issues when it comes to energy engineering all the time. And, like, I connected with local Green Party representatives who have been pushing this because a lot of people on the left have just kind of been accepting it as kind of like a it's as if they've done the work, so we just need to appropriate it and move on with it, kind of a thing. Um, which I don't think's the case at all. I think there's special interests involved here. There's um, pseudoscience involved here. There's the political agenda of the anti-nuclear, the anti-nuclear movement, for example, um, along with other groups that kind of fall in line with that typical camp. Not to put them all in the same bucket or anything, yeah. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. Um, it's worse than you think. Lower emissions, higher ground. Introduction. Our planet is a mess. The past 4 years have been the four hottest on record, and July 2019 was the hottest month ever recorded. Greenland is expected to lose 440 billion tons of ice this year, a rate that was the worst case scenario for 2070. The West is on fire. The middle of the country is flooded, and the Atlantic is seeing hurricanes of increasing frequency and intensity. In Alaska, salmon are dying because of the heat. All the while, the top five U.S. oil and gas companies posted revenues over $760 billion, and the federal government subsidized the industry to the tune of $26 billion annually. Climate change is an existential threat, and we need to recognize that we're already living through the negative effects. The increase in natural disasters is causing us hundreds of billions of dollars, and the total cost of climate change will run into trillions while taking an untold number of lives. And the people who are most affected by these impacts of climate change are the least able to deal with it. Economically disadvantaged and minority communities face a disproportionate burden. The right time to deal with this crisis was decades ago. We've waited too long. So we need to act fast and recognize that all options need to be on the table in order to adapt to the changed world we live in while mitigating behaviors that make it worse and reversing the damage we've already done. We can't dismiss any ideas, especially not those that have support from the scientific community, or rule anything out because it doesn't fit into our ideological framework. We have so far barely made a dent in what we need to do in order to combat this crisis. When 78% of our fellow Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, it's hard to mobilize people to care about the massive problem of climate change. Many think, I can't pay my bills. The penguins will have to wait. It's impossible to think about the future if you can't feed your kids today. We need to get the economic boot off people's throats of our we need to get the economic burden off of the throats of our fellow Americans so everyone can get their heads up and start facing this threat head on. We need to bring the full force of America to bear on this problem, or we will fail, and the world will suffer. My approach is five-pronged. 1. Build a build a sustainable economy by transitioning away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, upgrading our infrastructure, and improving the way we farm and use land. Public financing options will allow individuals to make the right decisions for their families. 2. Build a sustainable future. The United States, throughout history, has led the world in times of crisis. We're the most entrepreneurial country in the history of the world. It's time to activate the American imagination and work ethic to provide the innovation and technology that will power the rest of the world. Move our people to higher ground. Natural disasters and other effects of climate change are already causing damage and death. We need to adapt our country to this new reality. Hold future administrations accountable. We need to pass a constitutional amendment that creates a duty on the federal and state governments to be stewards of the environment. Climate change is big, and it is scary. It's destabilizing the world, and it's costing American lives. But it's also a massive opportunity. We can make the United States the center of the new global sustainable energy sector. This will bring money to the American people and will create jobs in installation and maintenance that will be local and less likely to be automated. It will also reduce a primary source of income used by some of our biggest adversaries. Russia, Iran, Venezuela all rely on oil, and terrorist organizations utilize it as primary fundraising mechanism. I need to take a break. Hold on. Oh my goodness. I just rolled over that. It will also reduce a primary source of income used by some of our biggest adversaries. Russia, Iran, Venezuela all rely on oil, and terrorist organizations use it as a primary fundraising mechanism. We can save the world for our children, make the environment healthier, and build a much stronger economy. We need to come together and get back to what America is all about: innovation, hard work, and solving the biggest problems the world is facing. Let's go, America. Signed, Andrew. All right, timeline. Let's take a little break here. All right. We need to get an aggressive but realistic timeline in order. We need to get an aggressive but realistic timeline in order to hit the targets required to ensure that our way of life can continue. We don't lose trillions of dollars, and we don't lose thousands of American lives in the process. Achieve net zero emissions goal 2049. So this is really similar to the goal that the Green New Deal has on the table, that essentially has us being close to like 80% by 2050. And it doesn't even account for the the financial fluctuations or the necessary inventions. It's just kind of like a very loose general project plan. There's a lot more I could say about the Green New Deal, honestly. So let's move on. Achieve net zero emissions goal 2049. So that's not anything different than we've seen before. 2025, establish net zero standards for new buildings. That's really interesting, coming from from somebody that's done one class in sustainable construction. A grad school overview of sustainable construction. It definitely seems like it needs to be one of our biggest focuses. A lot of states will use efficiency to kind of create and even kind of inflate the appearance of a demand for energy. So I think that's really important, is to kind of push back on the kind of house flipping culture in a way that, promotes not gentrification, but higher standards for everyone. 2027, new nuclear reactors, thorium and fusion begin to come online. Yes, absolutely yes. 2030, zero emission standard for all new cars. Okay. I think we could do it by 2030. It doesn't seem like we're even slightly approaching it right now. Although, I mean, noticing changes around the community, probably where you are. I'm not sure if you're in a more rural environment or if you're closer to something that's more urban, but there's charge stations everywhere. Now we've got these electric scooters for just like kind of short range transportation, and it's just going to get better from here. But it really needs to be a national and state project. It can't just be just states or just national. And there's so many private interests that are pushing back that it's difficult. It's something that we'll need to have as a vision to sustain past the private interests, past the corporate interests, past the beneficiaries of those who would rather this not happen. So the next thing is 2035, 100% renewable electric grid. Okay. 2040, net zero for all transportation sectors. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. That means that whatever we're doing for aircraft or for shipping has to be renewable. And renewable can include biofuels. So, people think that, if you're doing combustion, you're automatically dirty. The mindset with biofuels is that you're taking up carbon into the product that you're eventually going to burn and just re-release. So you offset that same amount in the fuel that you've grown, instead of just taking it out of the ground and then releasing that into the air. It's not going back into the ground later. It's not a vegetation that you can just sit there and grow. You can replant. Let's see. The next thing is, so we just did 2040 for all transportation sectors at net zero. 2045, 85% methane recapture. This is interesting. This is really interesting. I wonder how that could be achieved for all of the really interesting kind of, I don't know, scientific industrial use cases for methane. I think there's a lot of potential at the local level for methane, sustainable use of methane. And I don't know, there's a lot of implications with that, but I'd like to see that unpacked a little bit. 2049, fully green economy. Okay. So here's the timeline, just a little infographic. Could share that. Budget overview. Direct spending plan. 400 billion invested in democracy dollars over 20 years. 10 billion invested in debt forgiveness fund for rural co-ops. Wow, that would be fantastic. Rural co-op debt forgiveness. Okay, 200 billion invested in grid modernization over 15 years. That seems kind of low, honestly, but it may not even require that much. 30 billion invested in the next generation of safe, clean nuclear power over 5 years. Yes, absolutely. Oh my goodness. People who don't understand the value, the return on investment of nuclear research and engineering, they need to stop being so vocal. Use what you actually know to argue about this stuff rather than what you fear, okay? 250 billion invested in net zero emission ground transportation over 15 years. Okay. So that, I guess that means, across the board, the various personal transportation technologies or private transportation. Public transportation. 80.8 billion invested in net zero emission air transportation over 15 years. I feel like it may be more of a deal than that. Although the private markets are the ones that are really going to have to take over after the technology is there. 285.5 billion invested in sustainable agriculture, forestry, and land methods over 15 years. That so far is the second largest investment. So, I mean, he's really invested in the sort of cultural change necessities. So, he's not just looking at it from okay, we need to get people working on the solution project. It's also like we need to fund the right aspects of our culture that can actually organically solve this problem culturally and societally, not just from an engineering standpoint, but what about our culture is holding us back, is creating the wrong mindsets, propagating the wrong mindsets, empowering the wrong mindsets. How can we actually attack this issue? $5 billion invested in research for sustainable materials over 5 years. Great. I imagine that would yield so much value based on the every day we see some really amazing stuff out of material science. So I feel like this would be a fantastic use of that money. 45 billion invested in national labs over 15 years. All for it. Our national labs do amazing work. Albeit it's really difficult when they're underfunded or they're shut down. 3 trillion. Okay, so here's the biggest number so far. To finance for household investments for renewable energy over 20 years. So, money set aside to help people finance these changes in their own homes. Yes. We do need those types of programs. Gosh. Just realizing some of the scale of these ideas, makes me really detest what the conservatives have brought to the table in the past 3 years. 3 years, don't get me wrong. We're talking about the last 40 years at this point, almost 50 years that they've been back and forth over the denial of this thing. And, at some points it's in full acceptance. At other points it regresses into this big, negative for the economy or whatever. Just sick of it. So where were we? We're at the 3 trillion to finance loans for household investments in renewable energy for 20 years. Okay. Next is $60 billion invested in vocational and apprentice programs for 15 years. All right. So we got some vocational and apprentice programs that's going to help with, any emergent jobs, these kind of local creative type things and local trade type things. 70 billion invested in combating sea level rise over 20 years. I'm not sure what that means. I'd like to know what that means. Combating sea level rise, rising sea levels. So are we talking mitigation? Are we talking flood? You know what I'm saying? Flood. It's not really mitigation. It's just emergency flood infrastructure. So, pumps and underground wells and rediversion systems and that kind of thing. I wonder if that's what he means, or if he's talking about directly attacking various impacts themselves. So figuring out what we can do about evaporation. So the heat of lakes, or the sunlight beating down on lakes, causing lots of water to evaporate, we can counteract by basically putting a reflective surface on top. Maybe just a layer of little golf ball type things that makes a lot of that light reflect, so that water stays at level rather than most of it, evaporating off. These types of things are really low-tech solutions that could create a huge difference on a global scale. It'd be hard to do that across an ocean, and we wouldn't want to, but across a man-made lake that we're using as a reservoir, that might be perfect. Let's see. $25 billion in pre-disaster mitigation grants for high-risk hurricane communities over 10 years. Pre-disaster mitigation grants for high-risk hurricane communities. That's... I would have almost... I mean, I imagine that some numbers were drawn in order to get that number, but I feel like we may have wanted to put more towards that. 122.5 billion invested in fire prevention and combating wildfires over 5 years. All for it, but consider more is going in. Well, I mean, pre-disaster mitigation is always cheaper than post-disaster cleanup and dealing with the consequences, dealing with the loss of life, the loss of property, loss of just everything from families, like, perspective. Like, it's interesting to see the cost difference there, between fire prevention and combating wildfires. It's also double the time, so it's more like 50 billion versus 122.5 billion, but still. 90 billion to establish and fund the Climate Adaptation Institution over 20 years. That's something I need to look up. I don't even know about that institution. How can I not know about that institution? 200 million invested in geoengineering research methods. Who's that going to? Is that going to be state science? Federal science? You're going to use NASA for that? 200 billion discretionary spending to fund additional necessary programs over 20 years. Total invested over 20 years, 4 trillion. No. Yeah, 4 trillion 874. No. It's not 4 billion. Right? It's 874 million. It's saying 4,874 million over 20 years. I feel like it needs a few more zeros, right? Am I wrong? Because we're talking about lots of billions here, not 4 billion. Well, I guess that's just a typo. I certainly hope they amend that immediately. What do you need? What do you need weighted on? Hello. How many zeros to billion? Well, it's 6 zeros for million, so it's 9 zeros for billion. Therefore, 12 zeros for trillion. Exactly. How's it going, Frozen? And yeah, you're right. It's 12 zeros. I think they're missing 3 zeros on this number because look, I mean, they've got hundreds of billions up here, and this number, there's at least 1 trillion investment, like 1 point something trillion. Yeah, 3 trillion to finance loans. So this is in the trillions for sure. Yeah, I'd like to. I'll just click it down there and add it. But yeah, so we're talking 4 trillion 874 billion dollars. Yeah, I'll add that later. I imagine by the time I'm finished reading this, they'll be fixed. 285 billion for something, but over 2 years is 4 billion. Math totally. Yeah, I know, right? Not a good look to make this kind of a mistake when you're the math candidate. Well, this is definitely not a math issue. This is somebody on the press side's issue. Easy mistake, but a horrible one to make. So I'm going to move on. Build a sustainable economy. Thanks in part to the activism of the Millennial and Generation Z, or Gen Z generations, combating climate change by moving to a sustainable economy is a central issue of the 2020 presidential election. Excuse me. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez introduced the Green New Deal, which accomplished exactly what it set out to achieve, sparking a national conversation about how we define the scope of the problem and the scope of the solution. The backlash was immediate, and the argument against it was that it will cost us jobs, money, and growth. But I'm a numbers guy, and I looked at the math. This couldn't be further from the truth. First, the impact of climate change on health outcomes and life expectancy, not to mention increased damage and lost lives from natural disasters, is in the trillions. And that's if it doesn't end up making the planet increasingly uninhabitable for human life. Second, the last time we dedicated the American people to a massive manufacturing project, World War II, we grew our economy, kicked off decades of growth, and created a set of middle class jobs that provided upward mobility and a good life for half a century. Why do so many people believe moving to a sustainable economy will have such a negative impact on our economy and individual budgets then? Because of the oil companies. They've been making trillions of dollars for generations, externalizing all of the costs to the world while bearing reports on climate change and lobbying against climate legislation. When you're pulling in trillions of dollars, a few hundred million on lobbying and false advertisements is a drop in the bucket. The wide field of Democratic candidates presents an exciting opportunity for us to discuss how we will take on fossil fuel industry and tackle this urgent global crisis. The Green New Deal has done a great job in starting the conversation, and its goals of lowering emissions, converting to renewable energy, and creating good-paying jobs are commendable. We need to strive for these goals and set up a realistic plan, utilizing all options in order to get to a fully sustainable economy ahead of 2050. Oil companies will stop getting subsidized under my plan. The rest of us will see cheaper energy costs, better air quality, and new local jobs that we can use to support our families. Ending the influence of lobbyists and oil executives. Americans want their kids to breathe clean air and drink clean water. They want to leave a healthy planet for their children. Oil companies are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbyists to stop that from happening. The oil and gas industry spent $124.5 million on lobbying in 2018. This was a smart investment on their part, considering they receive $26 billion annually in direct subsidies and far more in various indirect subsidies every year. When your industry is looking at losing trillions of dollars, you'll spend nearly anything to prevent regulation, especially when those regulations will devastate your industry. It's time for us to end the power of lobbyists in the climate change debate. We need to ensure the workers in these industries are taken care of, but the executives can't continue to weaken the planet to line their own pockets. As president, I will ban anyone who serves in my administration from lobbying for a period of time after they leave their position, ensure representation in my government for workers who will be displaced by our shift to renewable energy and a sustainable economy so that we are sure to find solutions that enhance their quality of life, refuse to hire anyone who formerly worked as a lobbyist for oil, gas, or coal company, or served in an executive capacity at one of those companies. Pass a democracy dollars bill, putting over $20 billion in the hands of the American people annually to support politicians they agree with, and wash out the influence of lobbyists. The American Scorecard: Economic Measurements of Sustainability. Traditionally, the economy has been measured by looking at the gross domestic product, GDP, of the stock market. Companies are measured by their profitability. However, these measurements are imperfect at best and terrible at worst. The creator of GDP stated, when he came up with it, that it doesn't reflect the full story, missing the value of raising children and ignoring actual well-being. And the Friedman Doctrine, stating that corporations have a moral responsibility to maximize their profits, has resulted in these businesses externalizing many costs, especially environmental ones. When you measure something, you explicitly set your policy goals. By focusing our measurement on GDP and share prices, we've promoted production and profitability over all else. We need to move the way we measure the economy, and we need to move the way we measure the economy and corporate outcomes to actually take these environmental costs into account. If GDP goes up because oil companies make record profits, but levels of child respiratory illness also go up, we're not better off. If a company increases their share price by using cheaper but dirtier energy sources, they shouldn't be rewarded. It's time to start including environmental measurements into account when we measure the economy, including, but not limited to, environmental quality and sustainability, affordability of energy costs, childhood success rates, environment-related health outcomes, and quality of infrastructure. Every year, during the State of the Union, I'll report on these numbers, whether they improved, and what we're doing to ensure improvement by the following year. Excuse me. We also need to work with corporations in order to ensure that they're considering their sustainability in making their decisions. Any public corporation that has a valuation over $1 billion should be required to file an environmental impact report for certain activities, such as money they spend on transportation, or opening a new building, or moving to a new manufacturing method, subject to verification by the EPA that clearly states the financial cost of these activities on the environment and any means they're taking to mitigate those effects. Finally, we should also adopt the provisions of the climate risk disclosure bills introduced in Congress to force companies to disclose what impact climate change will have on their operations to the SEC. Investors should be considering these long-term impacts when deciding where to invest their money, and I can guarantee that if the true cost of climate change was baked into corporate valuations, companies that are poised to be the most impacted by climate change would see investment go down, thus pushing the economy towards a more sustainable businesses. That's really interesting. As president, I will create the American Scorecard to better measure the environmental quality. Oh, my goodness. I gotta slow down. I need to practice a little bit. Create the American Scorecard to better measure our environmental quality and sustainability, and treat it as a primary measurement of our economy and well-being. Pass legislation requiring large corporations to document the externalized costs of their environmental impact. Pass climate risk disclosure bills to incentivize divestment in oil companies and other heavy polluting industries. A sustainable economy. Energy. Residential and commercial energy consumption accounts for somewhere near 50% of emissions. We can't move to a sustainable energy economy. Residential and commercial energy consumption accounts for somewhere around 50% of emissions. We can't move to a sustainable economy without getting our energy from renewable sources. Tackling our energy supply is the biggest move we need to make in order to create a sustainable economy. We need a multi-pronged attack plan to decrease emissions in our energy sector, and we need to utilize all options available to us in order to ensure that we can hit the targets set out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to limit climate change to manageable levels. It is impossible to know right now which clean energy sectors are going to be the most efficient options in 10 or 20 years. The goal of having a renewable energy plan is to have a starting point of where we will invest our time and energy. First and foremost, it is important for our government to be able to adjust its plans as technology and more efficient solutions develop. Okay. Direct federal action to promote renewables. Over the past 100 years, I hate reading it that way. Over the past 100 years, the federal government has done much to prop up oil and gas industry. Early on, that was the right move. Our industrializing nation needed cheap energy, and the long-term impacts of burning fossil fuels were unknown. Of course, that excuse went out the window 40 years ago when scientists first informed the oil companies that emissions were a major contributor to climate change. Now that we all know the damage that we're doing to the environment, we need to end our relationship with an industry that has lied to the American people while knowingly poisoning the earth. It is clear now that the executives for these companies knew the damage they were doing and put short-term profits over the health of Americans and the long-term prospects of the species. It's unbelievable to say, but it's true. In 2015, the federal government spent more on direct and indirect fossil fuel subsidies, $649 billion, than it did on the Pentagon, $599 billion. These subsidies are yet another factor that obscures the true cost of fossil fuels. That money would be better spent to help individuals transitioning to a sustainable economy. Both the workers who work in these industries and the rest of us who rely on fossil fuels to power our lives. We also absolutely should not be providing leases to companies that are going to exploit public lands, both on and offshore, to harvest oil, gas, and coal. There is no way to get at these resources without permanently damaging our priceless public lands. And yet, you can stake a claim to an acre for $1.50. We need to stop the practice of providing these leases and move to end the current ones as quickly as possible. I'm all for that. Similar to ending these leases, we need to do everything we can to prevent further investment in infrastructure design to support the coal, oil, and gas industries. Most visible among these are pipelines. Oh my goodness. I know we're going to have some appreciation of that one. I'm just going to read that again slowly. I want to read this whole section again because that's fantastic. We also absolutely should not be providing leases to companies that are going to exploit public lands, both on and offshore, to harvest oil, gas, and coal. There is no way to get at these resources without permanently damaging our priceless public lands, and yet you can stake a claim to an acre for $1.50. We need to stop the practice of providing these leases and move to end the current ones as quickly as possible. Similar to ending these leases, we need to do everything we can to prevent further investment in infrastructure designed to support oil, gas, coal industries. Most visible among these are pipelines. Once invested in, businesses have an interest in keeping them operational long enough to pay back their initial investment and turn a profit, which will keep them operational well past the point where they need to be closed down to keep climate change at manageable levels. Under the EPA's mandate to regulate carbon, we need to increase our clean power plant targets to make our electricity sector sustainable and force all power plants to meet standards instead of just ones that are sufficiently upgraded to trigger a new source review. Yes, I've done that. It's I'm only like, if you look at the side of the bar, actually you can't even see it on your screen. I'm probably like a quarter of the way into this document, and at the top there's a very brief timeline that essentially says it tweaks a little bit of the Green New Deal timeline, and it says we need to accelerate that plan. Like, we need to aim to outdo that plan. I'm trying to get through it. Like, I'm trying to go all the way through it once and then unhash the stuff that we've passed. But if you want to go, you can probably, well, I guess as soon as this video posts, you can go back through and see that part. But I'll go back through here in a second once I hit the end of this section. So, under the EPA's mandate to regulate carbon, we need to increase our clean power plan targets to make our electricity sector sustainable and force all power plants to meet the standards instead of just ones that are sufficiently upgraded to trigger a new source review. Many communities, especially rural electric cooperatives, are currently using power from coal plants on which they owe billions of dollars. These communities want to shift their energy sources to renewables, but they can't afford to pay off their current debt, which is estimated to be at least $8.4 billion. On the old plants and build new ones, especially as the relative cost of coal increases and will continue as we end subsidies. The U.S. government can forgive the debt for those co-ops that are looking to make a transition to renewable energy and provide different financing options to these cooperatives to get them to move over to renewable sources. The government also needs to dedicate itself to a massive investment in new technologies and promise to purchase American-made efficiency and renewable energy technologies. We must plan all infrastructure projects to include environmentally friendly materials and be powered by renewable energy. We should incentivize corporations to do the same with their businesses. We should also commit to purchasing American-made items at a massive scale in order to incentivize businesses to manufacture these items. With the size of the federal government, a commitment to buying American efficiency and sustainability products will create massive demand that American entrepreneurs and businesses will be happy to fill. Since these technologies are advanced but still developing, it'll be important for the government to also work with the companies innovating these areas to create certain standards that would allow for interchangeability and upgrading. No one wants their electric vehicle to only be able to charge at certain stations because it uses a different standard. Think about the last time you needed a USB-C cord but could only find a Thunderbolt cable. Battery technology will also likely develop rapidly, so we need to make sure that the hookups for them are standardized. Think about what the world would look like if roads weren't a standardized size. How the auto manufacturers never complain that they have to fit a standard. To see how welcome this change would be. We can also plan out our recycling program for batteries as they develop and subsidize research into this process so that we can ensure we don't litter the planet with old batteries as soon as the next generation is released. Sustainability means designing products with their disposal in mind. Finally, we need to set sustainable infrastructure standards for all new buildings and base any infrastructure spending on meeting these standards. All federal buildings should also be upgraded to meet these standards. As president, I will end all fossil fuel subsidies and use that money for retraining programs and subsidies for low-income individuals to transition to sustainable energy sources. Stop all leases for oil and gas companies on public lands and end any currently existing lease. That's a big claim. Create more aggressive clean power targets and end the grandfathering in of old plants that have been sufficiently upgraded to trigger NSR. Provide $10 billion debt forgiveness fund for all rural co-ops that are relying on non-renewable sources who want to replace their plants with renewables, and provide public financing securitization options for rebuilding with sustainable energy. Commit to equipping and powering all federal buildings with American-made efficiency and clean energy technology. Work to create standards allowing common elements of systems like batteries to be easily replaced as the technologies develop. Create a plan to recycle elements that becomes like batteries that become obsolete. Set sustainable infrastructure standards for all new buildings that also are being rebuilt or upgraded, and all federal buildings. So before I get to carbon fee and dividend, I'm going to go back up there and look at the timeline just in case you're just checking in. So there's a budget overview that we went over before, and then there's this timeline. So this is just like the baseline goal. 2025, establish net zero standards for new buildings. 2027, new nuclear reactors, thorium and fusion begin to come online. 2030, zero emission standard for all new cars. 2035, 100% renewable electric grid. 2040, net zero for all transportation sectors. 2045, 85% methane recapture, and 2049, fully green economy. So this is his timeline. It doesn't include policies. So that's what you were looking for, is you're looking for the discrete policy timeline. This is just how do we achieve the emissions goal that the Green New Deal has also treated. We're getting to that, I think. All right. Carbon fee and dividend. The cost of burning fossil fuels is paid by all of us, but the benefits are disproportionately gained by industry. There is very little incentive to control the rate at which fossil fuels are burned or CO2 is released into the atmosphere. A carbon fee and dividend, similar to the one proposed by the Conservative Climate Leadership Council, would allow businesses to find market-based solutions to their carbon emissions while benefiting American citizens and providing funding for alternative fuel research and upgrades to our current energy systems. By having it increase at regular intervals, we can allow businesses to plan for their transition to sustainable energy. By having those intervals be aggressive, we can also be sure to hit our net zero target on schedule. Starting at $40 per ton, the fee would raise hundreds of billions of dollars in a year. Increasing it by $5 for the first 4 years and then $10 until we hit net zero would ensure that businesses have a deadline for the transition. but that can still make that transition on a timeline that makes sense for them. By some estimations, even a less aggressive carbon fee structure would reduce emissions by 90% by 2050. While the amount of money would necessarily decrease over time, eventually zeroing out, we can use the money before that time to help fund the transition to a sustainable economy, especially by subsidizing the cost of residential upgrades. As president, I will propose a carbon fee and dividend system that sets an initial carbon tax of $40 per ton, which would increase in intervals of $5 per ton for the first 4 years, and then $10 per ton until it hits $100 per ton. Creating a border carbon adjustment to protect American goods that would charge a fee on imports from countries that don't impose similar carbon fee or some type of carbon tax, provide a rebate on those exports to carbon countries that don't impose a similar carbon fee or some type of carbon tax. Dedicate at least half of the money raised dedicate at least half of the money raised through the fee to dividends specifically designed to help Americans afford transitions and to afford transitions to sustainable energy sources and vehicles. Grid modernization race to the top. Much of our electrical energy infrastructure is old, outdated, insecure, and far too dependent on dirty fossil fuels. Without renewed investment in new, cleaner assets and innovative management practices, our energy costs will become increasingly high and environmentally destructive. In order to achieve 100% renewable electricity by 2035, we need to create an economic drive for utilities to invest in updating their infrastructure while motivating innovation. We can do this with a race to the top type competition where utilities compete to enact certain reforms and the winners receive federal monies to reduce the capital cost of their investment. Investor-owned municipal and utilities and separately cooperatives would compete in 2 separate categories for a pool of $25 billion each. These utilities would be given 2 years to enact certain reforms or hit certain targets, with points being awarded for achieving the goals based on the schedule of points. Off-schedule points would be awarded by industry experts for innovation that achieves similar goals to the prescribed methods. A points floor would be set, and anyone above the floor would receive awards from the central pool proportional to their points. Reforms and criteria would include but not be limited to installation of smart meters, free access for account holders to interval data, streamlined interconnection processes, short interconnection processing turnarounds, tariffs designed to encourage renewable systems of all sizes, implementation of active or passive control standards that enable real-time management of distributed assets, not under direct utility ownership. Methods of differentiating and optimizing the financial concerns of administration, transmission, production, and consumption as separate grid system functions. Net decarbonization from the installation and retirement of various assets. Stakeholder education and outreach, including account holders, developers, and contractors. Robust IT security for metering and control systems, demonstrating a continued interest past the end date of the race to the top and continuing to implement these changes. As president, I will create a race to the top style competition to drive innovation in our grid system by the private sector, invest $50 billion in incentives for private companies and investment in new modern infrastructure, and invest $150 billion in upgrading our current electric infrastructure systems. Hey, Serene Doge, how you doing? How's it going, everybody? So now we are at the nuclear power stopgap, and it looks like we're getting close to about a third of the way through this document. Take a little bit of a swig here. Alrighty. Alright, nuclear power stopgap. Nuclear power is a crucial component in the move towards creating sustainable carbon free energy for the United States. However, many people, including some other candidates, dismiss it out of hand. Why does it have such a bad reputation? Two reasons. First, the public's perception of its safety has been skewed by TV shows like Chernobyl and The Simpsons. Second, nuclear waste is dangerous and long lasting, and disposing of it is expensive. Both points are less of an issue with modern reactors. When the OECD, NEA, and NASA analyzed the actual danger of nuclear energy compared to other sources, they found that it caused orders of magnitude fewer deaths than fossil fuel based energy, and that's not even considering the long term impact of climate change from burning fossil fuels. With modern reactors, safety is drastically increased, and nuclear waste is drastically decreased. After the completion of the Manhattan Project, America explored the option of using thorium as a potential source for civilian nuclear power. In the 1960s, the United States experimented with a thorium reactor to generate power, but the project was shelved in the 1970s. All the while, research into nuclear fusion devices continued in labs throughout the U.S. Why did we go with Why did we go with uranium instead of thorium? Uranium is used in nuclear weapons. Thorium isn't. Yet another benefit to using thorium as a power source. Thorium reactors have a few key advantages over traditional uranium reactors. 1 ton of thorium could potentially produce roughly 200 times more energy than 1 ton of uranium, and 3.5 million times more energy than 1 ton of coal. There is roughly 3 times more thorium on Earth than uranium, and we are already mining it as a byproduct of other rare earth element mining. Right now, we're literally just burying it back in the ground. Thorium mining is substantially safer than uranium mining. Thorium's primary ore, monazite, is retrievable from open pits, which receives greater ventilation than underground shafts from which uranium is mined, decreasing miners' exposure to radon. Thorium reactors produce less waste than uranium reactors. Thorium waste remains radioactive for several hundred years instead of several thousand years. Thorium-based molten salt reactors are safer than early generation nuclear reactors, and the potential for catastrophic event is negligible due to the design of the reactor and the fact that thorium is itself, not by itself, fissile. Nuclear isn't a perfect solution, but it's a solid solution for now, and technology we should invest in as we move to a future powered primarily by renewable energy. As president, I will invest $50 billion in research and development for thorium-based molten salt reactors and nuclear fusion reactors to provide a green energy source for Americans. Engage in public relations campaign to update the reputation of nuclear reactors. Have new nuclear reactors start to come online by 2027. Good to hear that you're doing good. What you having for dinner? And what time is it there? It's early in the morning here. I'm going to keep going on. Next is a sustainable economy. Transportation ground. Transportation contributes to 29% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. We need to eliminate our transportation emissions by converting our modes of transportation to clean and renewable energy by 2040. The government needs to set aggressive standards, especially since vehicles stay on the road for decades after their manufacture. In order to hit our zero emissions target, we need to require all models from 2030 on be zero emission vehicles. Wow. I wonder how the truck drivers feel about that. I wonder how the diesel lifted trucks feel about that one. The new fleet of primarily electric vehicles, EV, will require a massive installment of EV charging stations. Several states are already investing heavily in research of charging capabilities and installment of EV charging stations in big cities. For example, California has a goal of 1.5 million ZEVs by 2025, which includes investing $800 million over 30 months to install EV electric charge stations. Electric vehicle charging stations, sorry. Utility companies are also investing $1 billion in electric infrastructure. 5 p.m. there, and pizza, nice. Probably won't like it, but to be honest, they'll have their job won't have their jobs by then. Yeah, I know what you mean. And not even just the like the truckers, but like the mudding community, the what's it called, like rock climbing type, trucking jeep sort of community. I really think that market is one that needs to get some electric vehicles. Like I really think that's one of those like things that honestly something cooler needs to come out that's electric instead, to kind of push the market that direction. Because if it's better, people will go for it. People like stuff that works, and if it's legitimately better, people will see that. And that kind of includes a lot of these higher end kind of luxury or sport or kind of extras. When it comes to technology, all of those kind of need alternative use cases or alternative examples of that technology that are more sustainable. Surely people are going to still keep a garage race car or whatever that's powered by gas, and I think there will be more and more place for that as we fix this problem. But up until then, everybody's still going to want to go off-roading. You know what I mean? Like, there's still a good reason to go off-roading depending on where you live. So we need to see more of the cultural issue of trucks kind of get taken over in service. The trucks are really, really useful, so we need to see more of that market being treated. Anyways, where was I? Up here. The new fleet of primarily electric vehicles will require a massive installment of EV charging stations. Several states are already investing heavily in this research of charging capabilities and installment, especially in the big cities. For example, California has reached a goal, has a goal up to 2025, which includes $800 million investment to install charging stations. Utility companies are also investing $1 billion in electric infrastructure. We need to make sure that the areas in between these big cities are not left behind. My plan will invest $50 billion in EV charging station infrastructure to ensure that there is complete coverage of charging stations across the country. Excellent. Additionally, we need to move public transportation to renewables. Public transit infrastructure all over the country is crumbling, probably thanks to the Koch brothers. The backlog cost to fix it is $90. I injected that, by the way. That's not in the document. It's crumbling. Backlog costs to fix it is $90 billion and estimated to reach $122 billion by 2032. The government needs to start funding these projects now or else risk losing more money. That's just common sense. We need to spend this money anyways. We might as well invest more of it up front to make our public transit systems run on renewable energy. Every state operates different public transit systems. So it's important that federal dollars earmarked for sustainable public transit be given directly to the states with specific standards and expectations of net zero emission public transit by 2040 attached. The federal government can establish these standards, create a central database to share data between the states, and provide grants to states to ensure that they make the transition to fully renewable public transit. As president, I will immediately create a similar system to the ZEV program in California and require all vehicles starting with 2030 models to be zero emission. Invest $50 billion in EV charging stations in non-urban areas. Create $200 billion in a grant program to states to convert their public transportation systems, means trains, buses, schools, to electric vehicles. The old beauty of cars in that people don't tend to drive those through, just keep them as trophies and such. But yeah, get more electric EV in the fields would be great, especially they do gain traction in those communities. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm amazed that there isn't a huge market already for electric vehicle trucks, because consider how little weight like some of these like 4-cylinder trucks, like the little Ford trucks, little Nissan trucks. They're not really there for towing. They're just there for, hauling small stuff. Um, just the basic utility of a truck. It doesn't require, you know, all this extra that the electric vehicles can't already handle at this point. So I'm hopeful. I know that it needs an element of ruggedness. The idea is that things are so high tech that it's probably frail and brittle or whatever, but it needs to be the other way around. I feel like the old school tech is more open to failure. And I really think the market needs to show that. And I honestly think that it probably has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of these old like American industries like Ford and Dodge and Chevy and whatnot, they're all making most of their money off their trucks. It's all mostly the trucks. And they just have a huge incentive to not allow for the development of competition in that market. So they're the ones that really need to take it up and let it happen. I mean, if I don't really like being held hostage, my technology being held hostage by a like industry that doesn't have my best interests in mind. A lot of this document has already dealt with, that kind of issue and how that just kind of regresses everything that needs to happen politically. Oh, good. Went on the webpage to see if they corrected their 4 trillion mistake by only putting 9 zeros. Wait, just got rid of the zeros and put trillion. Okay. As long as they corrected it to trillion, that's good. The ridiculous amount of zeros is kind of an eyesore anyways. I mean, it's good to see how many zeros that actually is, because it's kind of ridiculous. The kind of money you can barely even picture in physical form. Isn't it $1 trillion? I think it's $1 trillion that can stack to the moon and back. What am I talking about, girls? Yeah. I'm talking about the Andrew Yang's new climate plan. This is one I've been interested in, the idea about how to make air transportation sustainable, because all that really comes to mind is renewable biofuels. So you just shift to just using biofuels. No current technology exists that would produce a fleet of planes that could serve all Americans completely emission free. Fully electric aircraft at that scale aren't likely to exist before 2050. Aircraft also have a long life. Many planes flown today will still be flying 20 to 30 years from now. I work at a local 7-Eleven. Then why are you talking about science? Why are you making scientific claims? Did you know that it was a conservative that originally whistleblowed climate change? It was a conservative. It's not a hoax. There's no need for a hoax anymore. And the people that are pushing that are typically in the pockets of either oil, coal, or gas. So, do you have any actual arguments about climate or about the policies? Or are you just here to throw mud in our water? Anyways, I'm going to start back over so you can get a sense of this. I think this is really important, the air transportation sector, because just think of the impact of international transit with air travel. Not only that, but our military uses an enormous amount of energy. And being as a former Air Force broadcaster who was part of the Air Force's transition to renewable energy sources, I have at least a little bit of experience with the Department of Defense taking this extremely seriously. In fact, there is no defense organization that doesn't take climate change seriously, especially sea level rise. So, anyways, no current technology exists that would produce a fleet of planes that could serve all Americans completely emission free. Fully electric aircraft at that scale aren't likely to exist before 2050. Aircraft also have a long life. Many planes flown today will still be flying 20 to 30 years from now. In order to move our air transportation emissions toward net zero by 2040, we will need to find alternative fuels that can significantly reduce current aircraft emissions and establish enough carbon capture systems to capture the aircraft emissions that remain. The government will invest in the carbon capture piece of the puzzle, and we will require the private and commercial sector to figure out how to meet the lower emission standard with alternative fuel. The government should also provide incentives that commercial airlines to produce and utilize a certain number of emission-free aircraft. We are not in the business of telling the private sector how to run their companies. Instead, we want to spark innovation and creative solutions. Several alternative fuels could surface in the next 15 to 20 years that allow aircraft fly with little to no emissions. Prospects include jet biofuel and sustainable aviation fuel made from algae, municipal waste, and used cooking oil. Recently, the largest emission-free plane just flew out over California. It ran solely on batteries and hydrogen. As research continues and technology develops, the government will also have skin in the game. The federal government needs to invest $20 billion, then less than half the amount awarded to the defense aircraft contractors in 2019, annually for 15 years in developing low-emission aircraft for our military and government air travel. If the government manages to come up with a realistic fuel alternative before private research and development, the government will happily share its findings. As president, I will pass the Aircraft Emission Act, requiring all commercial, private, and government aircraft to move toward low emission standards, as is technically feasible by 2040. Government investment of $2 billion in carbon capture technologies, research, and $9.5 billion over 15 years in installing carbon capture systems that can equal out the remaining limited amount of air travel emissions. Government investment of $300 billion over 15 years into research for alternative aircraft fuel. Okay. Now we get to the big one, agriculture. Agriculture, forestry, and land use. Agriculture makes up nearly $1 trillion of the U.S. economy. American farms feed the world, and our natural lands are a natural treasure. Both are also impacted by climate change, can be a driver of climate change, and need to be a part of the solution to the climate crisis we're facing. Our current farming techniques were built up over a century, where a primary concern was creating enough food to feed Americans and make a profit. Now, we are also having to contend with climate change. Local climates are changing, natural disasters, especially floods, droughts, and wildfires, are becoming more frequent. Our soil is becoming depleted. We need the government to work together with private enterprises to be better stewards of our land, to ensure that we can continue to feed our people with nutritious food. The government needs to ensure that farms that experiment with new, more sustainable techniques have the money they need to test these techniques and still be protected in case it decreases yield. We also need to invest in alternatives to traditional farming, such as vertical farming techniques. We need to research drought-resistant crops, along with other crops that can withstand the challenges of climate change. I got like a... Excuse me. We also need to research drought-resistant crops along with other types of crops that can withstand the challenges of climate change. The federal government can also work with states to determine what crops are most sustainable in their areas and track changes as climate change shifts the local climate. The federal government has given nearly $400 billion in farming subsidies since 1995. Subsidies help protect our food supply from bad years of extreme and unpredictable weather. Adjusting our agricultural system to adapt with climate change is a good example of why farming subsidies were created in the first place. A portion of planned farming subsidies over the next 15 years should be redirected specifically towards sustainable techniques with exploration of alternative farming methods. Okay, so people continue to cite all these historical examples of it being different than the current trend and the current model, and the current model is flawed and all of that. Think of it like this. The ocean is like a battery. in terms of heat energy from the sun, okay? And just like the ocean it can heat up and it takes a lot of time to cool back down, just like that, gas can do that, okay? And carbon dioxide is another gas. And it being in the air traps a certain amount of heat, and just like the ocean, it's like a battery, and it can heat up and take time to cool back down. And it also causes other effects that also cause those systems to cause heat up effects. And there's all kinds of new effects that we're learning about that accelerate this process. The ocean heats up, gas comes out because fucking more methane comes out of the ground. Like that, which is an even stronger driver of this heat process than even CO2. And in fact, water is the most powerful one. And when we have more inclement weather, we have constant moisture in the air that's capturing heat, but that's more of a natural process. It can capture that heat, it can recondensate and then precipitate. So, and that's rain. That's the regular water cycle. But when you have gases in the atmosphere changing, the chemistry of the atmosphere changing, and the ocean itself heating up like a battery but not cooling back down every year, all this stuff is loading on itself. All this stuff is building up over time. To pretend like human industry hasn't had an impact is suicide at this point. And it's really stupid to be pointing to, a volcano happened a couple years ago which showed the same fluctuation of hot and cold. Like, we know the drivers. Like, you can look at some of those impacts and see them change over time. Like, even the slightest chance that we can make a change, like, should drive our principle here to actually just do something about it. What if we're, like, why would we do nothing when we could be wrong? Like, isn't it better to just prepare and to ensure that we don't get caught with our pants down and we don't get fucked over for the benefit of the people that come after us? That's just me. Quick fix, nuke a volcano. Well, that's the thing. That's not really going to do anything. Like nuclear winters, you want to force a nuclear winter to cool things back down? That's not going to change what's wrong with the climate itself, what's wrong with the chemistry of the atmosphere itself. If you've been pumping in different chemicals into that atmosphere, it behaves differently. It behaves differently as to create weather, as to deal with heat, as to deal with like movement of forces like wind or whatever, like currents, air currents, like the jet stream. All of these things are going to shift and change as different forces and pressures change the dynamics. So some places will become extremely droughted. More places than not are going to dry out, get hotter, get more extreme. Other places will probably be inundated with tons of fucking water all the fucking time that used to be kind of just normal across the board. Just kind of like temperate, kind of relaxed. Everything is going to be more extreme in both directions. So, cause of this problem? Humans. Industry. Unchecked human industry. Yeah, energy. Yeah. Food. Land, I guess. Where's industry? Like, all of those entail industry, right? And if you consider the impact, the reality of capitalism, what is capitalism? It's taking an idea and scaling it up so that you can produce for a market, right? So along those lines, you consider that we're building technology for the entire world, and we have not really been tracking the impact of this. We've had scientists telling us that the industries were working against our interests for 50 some odd years on this one issue. It's almost like we're listening to the cigarette industry doctors about the health of cigarettes. Why would we do that? Yeah, exactly. Eat less meat, 100%, because that contributes to, more ranches that cause deforestation and whatnot, and just how much like food goes into feeding crops for, feed animals or whatever. And then on top of recycle more, that comes down to like the cultural change of like, waste and overuse and stuff. But honestly, I think that, demanding that we create incentives for companies to create better products kind of can offset the cultural thing, but also drive the mindset of, there's incentives for doing the right thing. You can get better business results if you do the right thing. So we kind of have to set up the system of incentives and kind of like to drive business the direction we want to. And you say cleaner energy, yeah, 100%. Like, what's the point in burning coal inside our house for heat? When the sun can heat it up, or whatever. Like, that's a really bad example, but why breathe in fumes when you could just sit there and sunbathe, for example? You know what I'm saying? Like, no brainers. Let me find where I was in this farm overview here and finish this one off. I definitely want to talk about this, and I think it's actually just the burps. I heard that it wasn't actually really the farts; it was actually the burps. And I'm not sure if it was actually like that much contribution. I think I saw like a debunk of it or something like that. But it's worth looking into. It's that, and it's the deforestation of actually needing the land for the animals, and then it's like the transportation, and then it's the feed for them. It's like, what strategy games do I play? My mindset's just like totally on something different. I'm trying to think. I play a lot of like tactical strategy games, so like space games. I played like World of Tanks and World of Warships for a while, and like War Thunder for a while. Those are more like sim games or like action kind of sims or whatever. But just really any game. Like, I might go over my Steam library at another time, but just like pretty much anything. If something comes to your mind, I probably know about it. May have played it or may have not have. Lately, I've been playing a lot of let's see, it's kind of like survival kind of games. Like, what's it called? The Forest. I've been playing a crap load of. There's also a game called The Island, which is like a survival with dinosaurs, like herbivores and carnivore dinosaurs. It's actually pretty crazy because you can only talk to your own species. Let's see, and a lot of Minecraft. I've been playing a lot of modded Minecraft, probably thanks to PewDiePie and others. But yeah, a lot of modded Minecraft, specifically Omnifactory, just because it's so much like technology packed into that. I think I'm on this paragraph. I'm just going to start with this because I remember the nutritious food part. The government needs to ensure that farms that experiment with new, more sustainable techniques have the money that they need to test these techniques and still be protected in case it decreases yields. We also need to invest in alternatives to traditional farming, such as vertical farming techniques. We need to research drought-resistant crops, along with types of crops that can withstand the challenges of climate change. The federal government can also work with states to determine what crops are most sustainable in their areas and track changes as climate change shifts the local climate. The federal government has already given nearly $400 billion in farming subsidies since 1995. Subsidies can help protect our food supply from bad years of extreme and unpredictable weather. Adjusting our agricultural system to adapt with climate change is a good example of why farming subsidies were created in the first place. A portion of planned farming subsidies over the next 15 years should be redirected specifically towards sustainable techniques and exploration of alternative farming methods. We also need to make better use of our land, and the IPCC has laid out a great list of ways we can improve that. The Department of Agriculture should investigate the best grazing and livestock land management techniques and provide reports to states and private enterprises on them. We need to identify land where we can plant more trees and also take an active hand and expend the resources we need to rejuvenate our high carbon ecosystems, such as peatlands, wetlands, rangelands, and mangroves. We can also decrease the stress on our farmlands by decreasing food waste. Supermarkets can receive tax incentives to waste less food. That's amazing. This can be done through encouraging the donation of food. I think that's excellent. This can also be done by encouraging better inventory management. Instead of overstocking, supermarkets can be encouraged to understock, with differences being made up and through tax credits. We should also be sourcing more local foods, and incentives can be made to label all produce where it's from. Wow, dude. Finally, we need to make better use of organic waste, both from livestock and from trash. Biogas, a type of biofuel that is generated by the decomposition of organic material, can generate a large amount of electricity from what would otherwise be a giant source of methane and carbon dioxide. The EESI estimates that we can add over 10,000 new biogas systems, which would generate electricity, reduce emissions, and save municipalities a lot more money on both transporting waste and maintaining landfills. As president, I will provide grants and guarantee profitability for farms that experiment with new, sustainable techniques, increase farm bill subsidies by $75 billion over the next 15 years for farms that experiment with new, sustainable techniques, invest $2 billion in research for vertical farming techniques, direct Department of Agriculture to provide reports to states and private enterprises to help them improve their grazing and livestock land management, work with states to determine sustainable crops for their areas, and suggest changes as climate change continues to advance. Increase funding of two biogas programs by tripling the current annual mandatory funding for biogas to $200 million. That's a big deal. Authorize a $500 million increase to federal agencies tasked with maintaining land to increase afforestation, while rejuvenating high-carbon ecosystems such as peatlands, wetlands, rangelands, and mangroves. Invest in research for drought-resistant crops. Provide $300 million in tax credits to incentivize supermarkets to waste less food, either through donations or inventory management changes, and to source more local food. Modded Civ 5 and Mountain Blade Warband. I've heard about Mountain Blade. Actually, I remember when like the first videos of it were coming out, and one of my he was actually my superior, but he was cool as shit in the military. He was hyped on that game. He was real hyped on it. It's sort of just like fallen off just because I've just been had too much to play, honestly, frankly. Too much to play, too much to do. So it just kind of like went behind me, but I need to check it out for sure. And Civilization games are always fun. I kind of like the space version of them usually. Trying to think, like what is that name? Not Stellaris. Stellaris is maybe a decent one, but there's a couple of them, some better than others. But yeah, I like the historical element of Civilizations. Like I really like kind of, role playing with the different aspects of history. I also played like Total War, back in the day. I think Rome Total War, and then like Shogun Total War. Those were awesome. Age of Wonders, Age of Empires, Planetfall. Yeah, definitely. I definitely need to try both of those out. Those are actually on my wish list. What other games do you play? Are you mostly playing strategy sim games as well? I'm going to quickly go through this materials section on sustainability. Awesome. Humans make a lot of cement, a lot of it. Concrete is quite literally what the modern world is built on. Around $10 billion of concrete are made each year, and the process is very energy intensive. Concrete does naturally absorb carbon dioxide, but that's a slow process, and it doesn't fully balance out the amount released in its manufacture. This is both a problem and an opportunity. As the world's population increases and more of the world develops, we need more concrete. However, since we manufacture so much of it, if we can find a way to harness the material to combat climate change, the scale of it would make and it would make a dent in the problem. Many different groups are currently investigating ways to improve the sustainability of concrete or even make it carbon neutral. We should invest in research to see if we can increase the absorption rate of carbon dioxide, or even find ways to capture carbon and turn it into concrete or into concrete substitute. The scale of concrete manufacturing makes it an ideal material to focus on, but we should also research other materials that can be used for a variety of functions that can help us combat climate change. As president, I will fund $500 million in research over 5 years into ways to decrease the carbon footprint of manufacturing concrete, make concrete carbon neutral or negative, and utilize alternative materials, including alternatives to concrete, that help us combat climate change. So it's not just concrete, it's also just on alternative materials in general that may also help. I'll say this, a sustainable economy, data. So planning for a sustainable economy isn't just about addressing current electricity needs. It's also about addressing the electricity needs of the future. One of the largest areas of growth in this regard is computing and data storage. The world is using hundreds of terawatts of energy for data storage, and the US makes up a substantial portion of that. This energy consumption is also set to double every few years. We need to stay ahead of this problem as we generate and store more data. The government needs to fund research into solutions for this problem, from increased efficiency to better and smarter cooling solutions, to storing data in space where temperatures and vacuum make storage more energy efficient and solar energy is plentiful. As president, I will fund research into any method that could lower the energy requirements of data storage. Yes, usually play strategy games. Like most games in general, kind of get more hours in the game costs on strategy games. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's the thing. I can't stand the games that are just one playthrough and done. I think like these kind of survival strategy games have really been getting to me. Like, what's it called? Space Engineers. I haven't played it yet, but that's one I want to get into. What's the one that's coming out? That's like or it's coming out with a sequel that's underwater. Both of them were underwater. It's Subnautica. Subnautica is an awesome game. Yeah, no problem. Probably a good time to take a short intermission anyways. We're about halfway done, close to halfway done. I'm probably going to edit this and put it up on YouTube, just in case you want to come back later and you feel like you're going to miss something. I'm going to edit out some of these like tangents and stuff, maybe correct unclear sounding reads and just fuse it all together into a nice YouTube video, which I'll post later in case you're interested. All right. I'm just going to go on. If you have any questions and want me to go back to something specific, just let me know and I'll try to work with you. A new national labs. There's been a lot of calls to research in the discussion of my plan to combat climate change. In order to funnel that research and funding and research efficiently, we need to set up a new system of national labs that are much more distributed and less top-down than we traditionally had in this country. Oh my goodness, yes. This new system, run through the Department of Technology, would hear proposals from different organizations on how they would use research funds in order to advance the fight against climate change. Yes, different models would be considered and funded, without the organization itself prescribing any particular structure. Funding through this organization would require sharing all data, and patents generated would face forced licensing so that others could build off of the successes. America is a country of inventors, builders, entrepreneurs, and risk takers. We need to unlock that energy and to solve the greatest problem of our time. As president, I will create a new distributed national lab system with a $3 billion annual budget that allows for many different types of partnerships and organizations to work together to solve some of the biggest energy problems we face. This system will lower the bureaucracy and hassle of working under a government contract so that scientists, engineers, inventors, and entrepreneurs can focus on innovating. Financing the new economy. Moving to renewable energy for personal use is important. It makes the home healthier. It lowers energy costs. It makes people feel like they're part of the solution. It also requires a large upfront investment. When the US wanted to ensure that everyone could own a home, we started Fannie Mae. When we wanted to make colleges more affordable, we created Pell Grants. In order to ensure that everyone can afford the investment to upgrade their houses with solar panels, weatherproofing, heat pumps, and other technologies, we need to implement similar programs. With the right financing, people can afford the upfront costs, lower their energy costs, and end up coming out ahead. By setting interest rates low enough, we can get most households to upgrade their electricity to renewables while keeping more of their money. We can also provide grants to individuals at lower income levels so they can do the same. As president, I will create the Renewable Energy Building Association to loan up to $3 trillion over 20 years to individuals to purchase heat pumps, solar panels, batteries, and other technologies for their residences. If households choose to take advantage of this, they will pay off these loans at a 3% or lower interest rate and will end up paying less annually than their previous energy bills. I'm sure everybody that's really excited about like being able to actually finance into some of these power systems where you end up getting paid by having to sell back the energy because you're producing more than you need. I'm sure people would love to be able to buy into that who have no margin to do so. So that's what this is going to help. As president, I will ensure $4 billion in annual funding for vocational and apprenticeship programs to meet the demand for installation and maintenance repair technicians for the new sustainable economy. Expand the high school curriculum to include programs to train individuals who want to enter one of these careers. Wait a minute, I just skipped all of this. Excuse me. My apologies. So, we're now on the jobs section. The scale of the work that we're going to need to embark on is staggering and exciting. As Saul Griffith, the founder of OtherLab, puts it, we need to manufacture electric heat pumps for 120 million American homes and 6 million commercial buildings. We need to manufacture 200 million plus electric vehicles. We need 90 million solar rooftops, tens of millions of wind turbines, and billions of batteries, not to mention new biofuel industries, new farming methods and technologies, and new approaches to forestry. And while many of these manufacturing jobs will be automated, the installation and maintenance of these systems will create good, middle-class jobs, local jobs that will keep individuals employed for decades to come. We'll need to establish vocational and apprenticeship programs that will train American workers to install, maintain, and repair these systems, and then ensure that all Americans who so choose can receive this training, including through programs in high school. As president, I will ensure $4 billion in annual funding for vocational and apprenticeship programs to meet the demand for installation and maintenance repair technicians for the new sustainable economy. Expand the high school curriculum to include programs to train individuals who want to enter one of these careers. Build a sustainable world. Hey! The United States is the most innovative and entrepreneurial country in the history of the world. We should be leading the world in the development of technologies to combat climate change. U.S. turbines and solar panels should be powering the world. Instead, we have a political party that's fighting against climate legislation tooth and nail, millions of Americans who deny that anthropogenic climate change exists, and a world that's leaving us behind. This must change. We need to recommit to the Paris Agreement. That's only a beginning. It's time that we retake our role as world leader. After all, we're only 15% of global emissions. While that's disproportionate to our population, it also means that even if we get to zero emissions tomorrow, the world will continue to still warm. Let's rebuild our alliances and use our industry and innovation to provide clean energy to the world, thus making new allies and rebuilding the liberal, democratic world order that has kept us safe for the past 70 years. Powering the world. The U.S. is innovative and extremely capable of developing cutting edge green technology. The private sector will be more motivated to invest time and energy in developing this green technology if companies can trust that they will be able to sell their products and technological advancements overseas. Typo. When foreign governments want to buy goods from private U.S. companies, the Export Import Bank, Exim Bank, finances the loan that allows foreign governments to purchase these goods. The Exim Bank can make certain goods appear more attractive to other countries by offering better financing options for different goals, like lower interest rates. Let's use its powers for good by making it cheap for other countries to buy U.S. sustainable energy technology. As president, I will use the Exim Bank or create new Green Exim Bank to aggressively export U.S. green technology throughout the rest of the world. Direct the State Department to engage in climate diplomacy, forming relationships with the developing nations that are looking for partners in building energy infrastructure that's sustainable. Trade deals. Once we cut fossil fuel subsidies and employ strict environmental regulations for manufacturing here in the U.S., corporations will want to move their operations overseas. After moving their operations to countries that allow fossil fuel productions, these corporations will then sell their products back to the U.S. through various trade deals that protect the fossil fuel industry. This would render our efforts to stop fossil fuel production useless because corporations would literally be incentivized to take away American jobs while polluting the environment. Additionally, the fossil fuel industries lobby to get the trade deals to provide them with incentives for development, preferential treatment in trade, or carve-outs to allow them more aggressively to combat the efforts of other countries to regulate their industry. We need to ensure that our trade deals with other countries match our values and environmental goals. We need to renegotiate our trade deals that protect the fossil fuel industry. Instead, our trade deals need to ensure that any goods manufactured, including unsustainable methods, are appropriately costed, and the fossil fuel industries don't get unwarranted power in the deals. As president, I will ensure that any trade negotiation includes stringent environmental standards, ensure that trade deal does not include carve-outs or exclusive for oil, coal, or gas, renegotiate any trade deal that includes carve-outs for fossil fuel industries, including the ISDS exceptions in NAFTA and USMCA. A carrot and a stick. China has a strong geopolitical interest in investing in development projects in third world countries all over the globe. China also does not care about whether the projects it finances are environmentally sustainable. If we do not step in and compete with China in foreign development investments, then several countries will develop economies that operate and depend on practices that emit greenhouse gases. It's the right thing for humanity that America invest heavily in these same development projects all over the world. Whether these investments are initiated by our government or by private corporations, the government needs to incentivize these projects to proceed in ways that are environmentally sustainable. Investments in non-environmentally sustainable projects should be more costly for everyone, and investments in environmentally sustainable projects should be greatly incentivized. As president, I will cut off or re-examine investments in projects that aren't environmentally sustainable, increase foreign aid to developing nations to help cover up the cost of any project that is environmentally friendly, create tax incentives for individuals to invest in foreign corporations or projects that are environmentally sustainable. Take a little bit of a breath here. Positive use of military expertise. Both in our country and abroad, poor communities will suffer the most as climate change accelerates. Many people all over the world are already being displaced from their homes due to climate change and natural disasters, and the displacement is only going to get worse. That's a fact. In 2017, 18.8 million people had to relocate within their country due to natural disasters and climate change. Experts predict that soon these displacements will not only Experts predict that soon these displacements will not only... Why am I seeing an only? Do I have dyslexia? Experts predict that soon these displacements will not be able to stay internal. A recent UN report predicts several regions where conflict and violence will be exacerbated by large numbers of refugees that need to cross the border due to climate change. Several Pacific islands, including Fiji, Tuvalu, Kiribati, and Vanuatu, I'm sorry if I butchered those, and the Marshall Islands, are predicted to go underwater within a few decades. Most of these islands already have plans for relocating their entire population should a cyclone or catastrophic disaster hit tomorrow that submerges their entire island underwater. So they've already got plans for that case. Small islands all over the world face the same threat. Most of these islands do not burn fossil fuels and have done nothing to contribute to climate change, yet they will soon be without a home country. Climate change is a destabilizing force. The military considers it a threat multiplier. Over the past century, we've used our military to project our power abroad, and that's often led to engage in wars without a clear benefit to the United States or in regime change. Let's change that. Let's use our military to project our power abroad by stabilizing areas impacted by climate change, helping countries build or rebuild their infrastructure to be more sustainable, and ease the movements of climate refugees as areas become uninhabitable. As president, I will direct the Pentagon to proactively identify areas that are becoming destabilized by climate change and offer military assistance in stabilizing and rebuilding the region, improving its ability to withstand climate. Move to higher ground. The time to start fighting climate change was decades ago. Because we were irresponsible and didn't take the threat seriously, we're past the point where we can avoid some terrible impacts. We need to move to higher ground, both literally and figuratively. As sea level rise, because of the melting ice sheets in Greenland and the Arctic, hurricanes become more intense and frequent, floods become more common, and wildfires spread faster through a drier forest. We need to realize what is happening and adapt to our new world. We need to come together and to help those who are most affected by climate change in our country. As with most natural disasters, poor and minority communities are often hit the hardest. Let's help our people out and ensure that everyone is safe as possible from the world we've created. Effects of global temperature rising. A child born today can expect to see sea level rise 1 to 4 feet within their lifetime. Rising sea levels will affect 5 million people in the U.S. There will be a 45 to 87% increase in the Category 4 and 5 hurricanes in the southeast. The southwest is approaching a 60% risk of 30-year-long droughts. Wow. Move to higher ground. Sea level rise. Estimates of sea level rise by 2100 range between 10 and 30 inches. A NASA study landed towards the top of that range at 26 inches. Several other countries are already moving their populations to higher ground to escape the encroaching water, and America is likely to see communities needing to do the same. This will cost billions of dollars. I would say potentially trillions. Rising sea levels. So it's got a couple states, all the southern/south, we'll just call these southern states. Texas is kind of southwest, but whatever. These states will lose up to $23 billion annually by 2030 if sea level rise just by 6 inches. Florida could see a 4-foot rise by 2040. This would cripple about half of Florida's flood control capacity. As glaciers melt, the oceans expand with heat, and ice sheets in the Arctic and Greenland melt. We're heading for a crisis. Mother Jones put together an excellent article rounding up some of the numbers, including the 13 million people who might be displaced by the end of the century. 60% of communities on the east and Gulf Coast may experience chronic flooding in the same time period. We're already experiencing it here where we live on the coast. The need to help individuals and communities prepare for this inevitability, either through direct adaptation of their residences or by helping them to relocate. As president, I will research coastal communities that are likely to be impacted by rising sea levels and provide property owners with information about risks and options. Make up to $40 billion investment, make up $40 billion available in subsidies, grants, and low interest loans to individuals who wish to elevate or relocate their homes or move to higher ground. Help communities plan for rising sea levels with expertise and information. Invest $30 billion in high risk cities to build seawalls and water pumps, upgrade roads and sewer systems, and rejuvenate beaches to serve as barriers to rising sea levels. Excuse me. Oh, good. We're finally reaching the third way point. All right. Move to higher ground. Floods, hurricanes, and the NFIP. The severity of hurricanes has increased significantly in the past decade compared to trends of the previous century. Even if we manage to cut our global emissions enough to curtail severe climate change, studies predict that we are likely to see more than 50% increase in Category 4 and 5 hurricanes in the 21st century. These hurricanes will continue to cause hundreds of billions of dollars in damage. That's where I was talking about the $1 trillion in damage. It's going to continue to happen. It's going to continue to pelt the same areas and get worse. These hurricanes will continue to cause this damage. We must take steps toward permanent adaptation to see changing climate. Let me restate this whole thing. We must take steps toward permanent adaptation to this changing climate to minimize the repeated cycle of these hurricanes causing untold suffering and billions of dollars in damage, only to see these communities be rebuilt to be hit by another hurricane. We must invest in innovative solutions for rebuilding our communities that reside in high-risk flood and hurricane zones. We can turn to countries like the Netherlands, who invested $500 million over 6 years. Compare this to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, which lost $161 billion in a matter of days, to build a massive floodgate that permanently protects all of the Dutch homes that reside below sea level. We can also look closer to home at Hoboken, New Jersey. After Hurricane Sandy hit in 2012, the city initiated a major storm resiliency effort to rebuild its parks, sewer systems, pipes, and gardens to withstand massive floods. Hoboken lost over $1 billion in Hurricane Sandy, and as a result, it is spending $140 million alongside $230 million in federal aid to rebuild its city in a way that will prevent it from losing the same amount in future inevitable disasters. Investments in flood prevention solutions that cost hundreds of millions of dollars can prevent us from annually losing tens of billions of dollars in catastrophic hurricanes. This funding will go towards redesigning cities at high risk of damage. By upgrading our coastlines to withstand incoming disasters from the sea, our entire country will be better protected. Cost of natural disasters. Wildfires in California, $24 billion in 2018. Midwest floods, $3 billion in 2019. Hurricane Sandy in 2012, $71 billion. Hurricane Florence in 2018, $24 billion. Hurricane Michael in 2018, $25 billion. Hurricane Katrina in 2005, like we heard, $161 billion. Hurricane Harvey in 2017, $125 billion. Estimated cost of natural disaster prevention measures. Waterline defense systems for New York and New Jersey, $920 million. Redesign of Hoboken, New Jersey to withstand flooding, $230 million. Dutch Flood Protection Program, $500 million. Why wouldn't we spend hundreds of millions when we could lose tens of billions or hundreds of billions, right? And I said that backwards intentionally. Concurrently, we must evaluate FEMA's policies in our National Flood Insurance Plan. FEMA's out-of-date flood zone map needs to be updated to reflect the true 41 million homes that are at risk for high catastrophic flooding, not the 13 million it currently states. The agency's prevention policy in response to floods and hurricanes is to rebuild homes and buildings that are more resistant to flood damage. FEMA does not currently have a policy that prevents them from rebuilding homes located in high-risk areas. As a result, several homes have received more federal aid to rebuild their homes than we thought the home was actually worth. For example, the same home in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, has been built 40 times, costing the government $428,000, or $379. Let me restate that number again. $428,379, even though the home is only worth $55,921. Our National Flood Insurance Plan was designed to force the purchase of flood insurance for higher risk areas, thus increase the cost of living there and cause people to move to safer areas. Unfortunately, people have continued for 50 years to live, build, and rebuild their homes in high-risk flood zones. As a result, private insurance companies are in a position to make money when major natural disasters hit, leaving the NFIP over $25 billion in debt. Our federal agencies and plans that are designed to help those who are affected by hurricanes and floods must take a stricter line on rebuilding in areas that are likely to be damaged again. These organizations should absolutely help people after a national disaster, but they should also ensure that we are not throwing good money after I think that needs a word. These organizations should absolutely help people after a natural disaster, but they should also ensure that we're not throwing good money away, I think, after bad, or throwing money after bad, and relocate people as needed after disasters to ensure that they don't end up in the same position again. As president, I will invest $25 billion over 10 years in helping communities that are likely to be impacted by repeated hurricane or flood damage to make their communities more disaster resistant through pre-disaster mitigation grants. Reevaluate the way FEMA and NFIP determine where structures can be rebuilt, taking a stricter stance against rebuilding in danger zones. Alright, I gotta take a short break. So we're gonna be right back. I'm gonna take a 5-minute break a mundo, and we'll come right back to it and finish it off. We're really close to the end, but I want to finish strong. So be right back.
We look to the past for inspiration to craft the light fighter of the future. Unmatched design, best in class maneuverability. Leave your enemies bewildered. After all, how can you kill what you can't catch? The 2949 Arrow from Anvil. Rise above. Available now. See your authorized Anvil dealer for details.
All right. Welcome back, Yang Gangers and Yang Gangers, trolls, passive observers, climate folks, other folks of other candidates, what have you. Welcome to you all. We are back pretty much at the last third. I know a good portion of the end of this document is just citations, so we're quickly getting to the end. So far I haven't seen like a time scale for the specific goals of a lot of these, though it kind of works within the overall framework. But what was it earlier, Nave Kristalina whatever made a good point about how there's a lot of details in this, a lot of specific actions that need to be taken, but there needs to be a time scale. Like, when are these going to be accomplished? Are these going to be accomplished in your first year? First 18 months? Like, what's your goals? What do we need to see? Where's the timeline? Like, how can we hold you accountable to this? How can we say this can actually get done? All right. So let's get back to this. Move to higher ground wildfires. Decades of fighting the spread of wildfires have prevented a natural cycle of thinning that had kept forest fires under control. Before European settlement of the West, 1.5 million acres would burn each year. Since then, it's been about 75,000 acres per year. Less than 2% of California forest land saw proactive treatment in some recent years, and one of the most effective means of controlling future fires, prescribed burns, is limited by cultural and legal hurdles. EPA standards and the Endangered Species Act, however, oh, that was part of the list. Excuse me. So I'm going to read that again. Less than 2% of California forest land saw proactive treatment in some recent years, and one of the most effective means of controlling future fires, prescribed burns, is limited by cultural and legal hurdles, EPA standards, and the Endangered Species Act. However, this takes a short-term view on the dangers of uncontrolled wildfires to both the environmental quality and animals in these habitats. We have a problem in this country, and it's costing us billions of dollars a year. It's only going to get worse as climate change exacerbates the problem. We need to start listening to what the experts recommend and how to control these fires. So we need to listen to the experts on how to control these fires. I agree. More money needs to be spent on prevention to match the scope of the problem. And we need to properly fund the U.S. Forest Service in order to proactively address threats before they become fires. We need to provide Western states the same amount of funding for local fire prevention and emergency preparedness planning initiatives. We also need to shift our cultural view that all wildfires must be stopped in order to allow the natural cycle to regain control. These natural fires need to be supplemented with prescribed burns, which stay limited to their defined areas 99% of the time. The EPA must make a long-term view towards the dangers of megafires versus prescribed fires when analyzing the environmental impact on controlled burns. Finally, we need the federal government to partner with the state and local governments to aggressively collaborate in finding solutions to these life-threatening risks. The federal government can properly fund the cost of preventing and fighting fires on federal land, while also learning from state best practices in administering these prevention efforts. The federal government can assist state efforts by providing a federal fire insurance program that depends on the homeowner's compliance with the state fire prevention policies. Incentives for developing land in safe areas also need to be implemented, either through changes to federal standards, changes to mortgage interest deductions for housing built in high-risk areas, or the implementation of federal fire insurance program to price in the costs of living in high-risk areas. To price in the cost of living in high-risk areas. As president, I will quintuple the budget for the U.S. Forest Service to $24.5 billion for at least 5 years, and specifically tailor it to focus on fire prevention and promote partnerships with local experts on combating wildfires in their areas. This will more than pay for itself in preventing mega fires. Appoint a Secretary of Agriculture who recognizes the importance of preventing mega fires using science-backed techniques. Work with federal agencies such as the EPA to adjust how specific metrics are measured to take a more long-term view of the costs and benefits of prescribed fires. Work with Congress to pass legislation aligning incentives for states, developers, and homeowners towards fire prevention and avoiding high-risk areas. Establish a national fire insurance program that provides insurance for homeowners in high-risk fire zones with a stipulation that homes must be built to take prevention actions such as defensible space and reevaluation standards in case locations are determined to be dangerous for rebuilding. Move to higher ground. Extreme weather effects. Additional effects of climate change include extreme changes in precipitation, droughts, heavy downpours, heat waves, mudslides, tornadoes, avalanches, and more. Some will increase more than others, but we have to be prepared to deal with all of these natural disasters. For example, the Southwest can expect to see longer droughts and heat waves in the near future. In the past, droughts have not lasted longer than more than a decade, with the risk of a mega drought, droughts lasting over 30 years, below 12%. Scientists predict that the risk of mega droughts in the Southwest is likely to increase to 60% in the coming years. Urban areas will also see increased droughts, and they need to be prepared. They have higher water needs, but they also have the ability to utilize better urban planning to recapture a majority of the water they require. The Southwest is expected to receive less precipitation over the next century, while northern states are expected to receive longer winters and springs. The exact effects of these extreme weather changes are tough to pinpoint, so we need to be proactive in our efforts to monitor the changes and come up with solutions. There are other effects of climate change. These and other effects of climate change will continue to be unpredictable for years to come. To monitor the ongoing effects of climate change, I will establish the Climate Change Adaptation Institute. This will be tasked with monitoring the impact of climate change and recommending ways to adapt to the new world that we're living in. It's important to stay optimistic and to mitigate our impact on the environment. It's just as important to adapt to the damage we've already done. As president, I will establish a Climate Change Adaptation Institute with starting an annual budget of $4.5 billion to monitor the ongoing effects of climate change and propose new adaptation measures, including better urban planning, better farming methods, better land use, especially with respect to water management during the droughts, educational drives to inform people on how to cope with heat waves, and prepare treatment centers to quickly respond to and treat individuals suffering from the effects of the heat wave. Better equipping local officials to respond to emergencies such as floods, droughts, landslides, mudslides, avalanches, and outbreaks. Reversing the damage. We've already done a lot of damage to the environment. Glaciers and ice sheets have melted. Greenhouse gases have accumulated in the atmosphere, and more of our land is succumbing to drought, desertification, and wildfire. To accept these as irreversible is to accept limitations to human ingenuity that I don't believe are true. Our scientists were able to unlock the power of the atom. They can also find ways to reverse the damage done to our world. As I've said multiple times, we need to leave all options on the table to combat climate change. That includes geoengineering, methods to reverse the damage that we've already done to the environment. The urgency of our current situation highlights the need to keep investigating any and all solutions. The urgency of our current situation highlights the need to keep investigating any of all. The urgency of our climate situation. I can't read like what's his face. The urgency of our current situation highlights the need to keep investigating any and all solutions. In general, geoengineering methods fall into two categories, though there are ideas that don't fit into either one. The first category is solar radiation management. These techniques decrease the amount of sunlight that hits the atmosphere,
or reflects more of it back into space. The second category is carbon dioxide removal, techniques that remove the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. This latter category has already featured in earlier sections through ideas including afforestation, but there are more scalable examples we can research. These techniques don't work as a replacement to moving to renewable energy. Outside of the impact on climate change, renewable energy has other benefits, particularly in cost savings and improvements to health. However, we should investigate geoengineering in case we can't change our behaviors fast enough to ward off the worst of climate change. We also don't fully understand I need like some tea that has like honey in it. Something to keep the throat coated. Because what I have now is seltzer water, and I think what it's doing is just stripping my throat over and over. And then clearing my throat makes it even worse. But I can't help it. Okay, let's finish this. We also don't fully understand our planet and climate, and we could hit a tipping point that would warrant more immediate and extreme action on faster timeline. If we don't start experimenting with these methods, then someone else will. Let's be a world leader in geoengineering that can ensure it's safe and scalable, and we're in charge of deploying it should the need rise. I like how this... Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Welcome back. Welcome back. Certain geoengineering... Well, title. First options. Certain geoengineering options are easy to reverse, or benign enough that we can feel safe deploying them without much further testing. For example, planting millions of new trees would store large amounts of carbon. Ethiopia recently planted 300 million new trees, and more countries can engage in similar projects. We should also engage in ocean afforestation, seeding the oceans with microalgae. Additional carbon capture technologies can help us to remove a lot of carbon from the air, a process that we know is safe because trees have been doing it for longer than humans have existed. Not only that, but scientists largely agree that technologies in this area must be a part of any climate program. Different organizations are researching the use of carbon capture to create building materials, carbon-neutral fuels, and even ethanol. The federal government should encourage this research while still ensuring certain safety guidelines. We can also use this captured carbon to improve our soil, for example, biochar. We can also take smaller steps like packing gravel against the bases of glaciers to slow their melting. Finally, certain solar radiation management techniques are safe. Excuse me. Certain solar radiation management techniques are safe. For example, spraying salt water into clouds makes them larger and brighter, which will reflect more sunlight into space. Geoengineering proposals. Ocean seeding. Increase population of carbon-absorbing plankton. Stratospheric aerosol scattering. Inject sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere to reflect sunlight away. Afforestation. Plant trees to increase oxygen. Carbon capture, direct capture and storage of carbon dioxide. And space mirrors. Reflect the sun away from the Earth. These are just some examples. Emergency options. While the above solutions are important to investigate and can bend the curve to give us more time or serve as a partial solution to the climate crisis, we should also prepare for the worst. There are feedback loops that we don't understand that could quickly lead to catastrophic event. If it comes to that, we need to be prepared with options that have potential side effects that are more desirable than the alternative, climate collapse. Two primary ones to consider are space mirrors. Yes, space mirrors, and stratospheric aerosol scattering. Space mirrors would involve launching giant foldable mirrors into space that would deploy and reflect much of the sun's sunlight. This method would be extremely expensive, which is why it should be investigated as a last resort. However, since we would be able to undo the mirror after deployment if needed, it's less permanent. since we would be able to undo the mirror after its deployment, it's less permanent. Stratospheric aerosol scattering, on the other hand, would be a drastic response to the climate crisis. When volcanoes erupt, they spew sulfur dioxide into the sky and reflect sunlight particles away from the Earth. The massive eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991 was recorded to help push global temperatures down half a degree over the following 2 years. If scientists can find a way to burn sulfur in the stratosphere, then they can mimic the positive effects of volcano eruptions on climate change and their ability to help keep the Earth cool. Bill Gates has recently backed a study to explore the feasibility of this method, but there are many dangers to it, which is why it and other similar methods require research. As president, I will provide $800 million to NASA, the Department of Defense, and NOAA to research, experiment with, and test geoengineering methods that will give us more time to deal with climate change, or give us options should we hit a climate tipping point of which we weren't aware. Convene a global summit on geoengineering. Many researchers in the US and other countries are doing work in this field. If we bring them together, we can formalize and accelerate our learning and build a global approach. Holding future administrations accountable. Even if we make great headway in mitigating and adapting to climate change, there will still be voters and elected officials who choose to discount the basic scientific facts of our changing world. We need to prevent future administrations from untangling the significant advances we make in combating climate change. I'm just going to restate that. We need to prevent future administrations from untangling the significant advances we make in combating climate change. I support the calls for a constitutional amendment requiring states and the federal government to protect, preserve, and improve the environment. By leaving all options on the table, heavily investing in research, and activating the patriotism, entrepreneurial spirit, leadership, and community that America is known for. Another typo from my old version, American instead of America. By leaving all options on the table, heavily investing in research, activating the patriotism, entrepreneurial spirit, leadership, and community that American is known for, we can make sure that the planet is livable for our children and our children's children. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick. It's going to be a generational challenge. There will be a constant need to find ways to make our impact on Earth more sustainable. But, as many people have said, Earth is the only planet we've got. Let's make it one we're proud to call home and pass on for generations to come. Andrew. And then we've got his footnotes. There were many citations, references, etc. So yeah, that's it. That is the entire thing. We'll go back up to the top and just kind of see some of the first infographics. So there's an overview of the budget investments. Here's the initial timeline. It's not clear his plan of attack for like his priorities during the first year or anything at this point, but in reading this you get a general sense of what is top priority, what's comes after a certain thing has like come into fruition, or after the benefits of it are seen, it kind of leads to the next step. I hope that they will continue to add to this along those lines, because that's a valid point that we need to understand practically how this is going to play out politically. How do we continue the pressure that we need, to combat the negative interests? It can't just be, a bunch of sweeping executive orders, right? It's going to have to be done legitimately. It's going to have to be done in bipartisan fashion. It's going to have to be done, I don't know, pragmatically. So, yeah. If you have any questions about it, or if you want me to, cycle back over a particular point, let's do that now. Because I'm just going to sit here and chill for a couple minutes and look at this, answer some questions, and just chat with you guys. And then I'm headed out because I've got to take care of myself and do stuff today, and then hurry back and get this chopped up and edited so I can throw it up on YouTube. So yeah. How is this compared to other plans that I've seen? Well, in the very beginning of this, which I know that you missed, he references the Green New Deal, and he says that the Green New Deal accomplished sort of what it was meant for, which was kind of just initiating this conversation and like kind of proving that, I guess, I mean, this part of it is just my own insight, that the latter half was supposed to be there to prove that Democrats cared about job security of coal miners and oil workers and whatnot. Like, it wasn't just about destroying industries. It's about rebuilding opportunities and moving everybody forward. And so I think this is like the only plan that exists, to be honest. Like, I don't think that anybody else really has a plan. Like, the Green New Deal is kind of like the framework that was necessary in order to establish this, but it also leaves out a lot of really important research and options and insights and ideas that I think this one puts to shame. Like, I don't think anyone should be caring about the Green New Deal at this point, except for people who are like already behind the curve on the entire conversation. I feel like maybe that's a good just way to start the conversation, is to get people to think about what the Green New Deal is actually about. But because who pushed that, who drafted it, and how it's unchanged all the way up until Bernie's adoption of it, it's not recommendable. Like, I don't think it really puts... I don't really puts it puts a plan out there. I don't think it really gives us anything to like cling to. Whereas we don't have an exact timeline. Like, we need to set aggressive but realistic timeline in order to hit the targets required to ensure that our way of life can continue, but we don't lose trillions of dollars, so we don't lose thousands of American lives in the process. So it's like, I will build the algorithm, or I will build the timeline, but here's the algorithm necessary to build a realistic timeline. You must consider these points. So I expect that these net zero goals, on top of this type of timeline formula, I mean, I expect to see much more argument, and I hope that he's already prepared for the questions that are obviously going to fly out along those lines. But yeah, do you have anything to add, or you disagree with me, or anything else that you'd want to ask about? Just gotta check my email and stuff, do the naughty stuff that you're not supposed to do on stream. But yeah, any other questions? Greatly appreciated. I'll do my best. Also, if you think of any down the line, you can message me. I don't think you can message me on Twitch anymore, but you can comment on the video. You can comment on the video in Twitch if you watch it there, or you can go to my YouTube channel. Later, I will be uploading a chopped up, more quick version of this, so you could comment in the video down there. Those are probably the best ways to get at me. Other than that, you can hit up my Twitter at Critical Repost. Just gonna check some. See what's going on.
My goodness. Somebody was talking about Trump's travel ban, and I kind of started this conversation up before I got into this, but they have been asking over and over and over because they're obviously interested. Obviously want to know what I was talking about. The argument on the right is it came geographically. So we were talking about specific nations that we were banning people from. But the fact of the matter is that it wasn't just the locations that we were banning people from, it was their ideology that we were particularly filtering out. And I remember Sam Harris defending the potential of that, of the potential value in considering the different ideologies and the impacts of the different cultural beliefs and whatnot. But still, that's a discrimination based on religion itself. You're discriminating based on the association to a religious association, a religious group, religious faith, organized faith, official faith recognized by, the government or whatever. Anyways, go to Facebook when it's done. A question. All right, cool. Alrighty, guys, and gals, and anything else, whatever you want to be called. It's about that time. I appreciate you hanging out with me and listening to me tarry on through this very long read. I hope it wasn't a nails on chalkboard for you. Anyways, like I said, direct all your questions either over to my Twitter or over to the YouTube. It's probably the best way. And look out for the shorter version to be up later. Thanks again for hanging out with me, and I'll catch y'all later. How do I do my ending? Something like this? Oh, okay. This is just like that. Alright, guys. Take it easy.